we have an interesting topic for tonight. And I want to start, of course, also by wishing everybody here a very special and a wonderful Chodesh Tov. What a powerful month this is, the month of Rosh Hashanah, the month that leads us into the high holidays, the month of Teshuvah. It's a time to be able to do and accomplish such great things for each and every person in their own world and in their own realm. So it's a zechut to be able to kick off Rosh Chodesh with these words of Torah. So I'm gonna, if I can, just for 1 second, I want to read for you the words of the section that we're going to be focusing on tonight. And anyone can follow this if they want. It's in our parasha this week. Our parasha of the week, of course, this week is Shoftim. Open up Shoftim and you will see a very interesting set of Pesukim. And I'm going to quote the Pesukim to you so everyone has a chance to be able to follow along and to draw their own conclusions. Ki tavo el haaretz, when you will come to the land, asher Adonai Elohecha noten lach, when Hashem is going to give you this land, v'yirishta, and you will inherit this land, v'yashavta ba, and you will dwell in the land, v'amarta, and you shall say, asima alai melech kechol hagoyim asher svivotai. I would like to place on myself a king just like the other nations that are all around me. Every other nation around them had a king in this time, so we want to have that too. Som tasim, says the pasuk, a double language. Som tasim, place, you shall surely place alecha melech, asher yivchar Hashem elokecha bo, a king that God himself will choose, mikerev achecha, from amongst your brothers. Tasim alecha melech, you shall place for yourself a king. Lo tuchal latet alecha ish nochri. You can't put a foreigner, asher lo achicha hu, who is not your brother, who is not someone from amongst your people. Rak, and then the Mishnah, the pasuk tells us, lo, there's a couple of laws for this king to follow. Lo yarbe lo susim, v'lo yashiv et ha'am Mitzrayma, leman arbot sus, v'Hashem alechem lo tosif lashuv v'derech hazeh od. So one more time, what is the king not allowed to do? He can't have too many horses. He can't return the people to Egypt. Lo yarbe lo nashim, he shouldn't have too many wives. A king is allowed to marry many wives, but there's a limit as to how many wives he's allowed to marry. Okay? V'lo yasur levavo, and therefore those women that he'll marry so many different wives, obviously tending to each and every one of them and their needs and their desires and maybe even their proclivities, will turn his heart away from Hashem. And gold and silver, he should not have too much of. So again, 4 no's that the king is not allowed to have. What are they? They are in excess of money, in excess of wives, in excess of horses, and finally, the pasuk now tells you, after telling me, and returning the people to Egypt, after telling me these 4 things that the king cannot do, the pasuk says, "V'haya kishivto al kiseh mamlachto," when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, "V'chatav lo et mishneh haTorah hazot," he will write this mishneh haTorah, this reviewing of the Torah, al sefer mefnei kohanim v'levim, in front of the kohanim and the Levites. V'hayeta imo, and the sefer will be with him all the days of his life. V'kara bo kol yimei chayav. למען ללמד ליראה את השם אלוקיו, לשמור את כל דברי התורה הזאת, ואת החוקים האלה לעשותם. לבלתי רום לבוא, his heart should not be raised above his brothers, and he shouldn't turn away from the mitzvot, ימין ושמאל, right or left, למען יאריך ימים על ממלכתו ובניו בקרב ישראל. In order that he should be king for a long period of time, he should have a long, happy, and healthy reign if he does this. Now, let's focus one more time. There are 4 things, therefore, that a king needs to do. 4 things. And it seems as well that aside from the 4 things that the king needs to do, there's also a few other things that the king needs to do if someone's paying attention. What else does the king need to do? The king also needs to write for himself a Sefer Torah that goes with him no matter where he goes. Our rabbis learned from this that every king of the Jewish people had to have not one, like every other Jew, but he had to have 2 Sefer Torah. 1 sefer that he left in his home, and 1 sefer that he took with him everywhere he went, v'kara bo, and he read in it, kol yimei chayav, all the days of his life. Now, there are many questions that anyone who's thinking would look at this and be able to see. And before we get, as we always do together, before we get to a place where we're going to discuss the narrative of a person's self and how this relates to you and me, let's first look at it in its native understanding when we're talking about a king of Israel. What's interesting is, V'haya kishivto al kiseh, says the Torah, and when he will sit on the throne of his kingdom. What happens when he sits on this throne? V'chatav lo et mishnei Torah. It tells you the others that he has to do when he's the king. But when it talks about writing a sefer, it says, and when he will sit on the throne, then he writes the sefer, and he'll have the sefer with him. Why does it seem to differentiate this sefer Torah that he's writing for himself from the other 4 things that he needs to do? As soon as he gets into office, you get sworn in, you have to do this, you can't do that, all happens at the same time. It almost seems as if they take place at different times. Question number 1. Question number 2, why does the king need 2 Sifrei Torah? He's going to take it with him everywhere he goes. He's going to read it nonstop. I got you. I'm with you. 100%. That all makes sense. But at the same time, even if he's going to read everything, even if all that makes sense, why couldn't he just take the one? A Sefer Torah is it's not a cheap proposition to be able to do, right? It takes a long time. Sorry. I'm just going to turn this way because I see people are still bothered by the echo. I know I can get rid of the echo if I get out of this little kind of little area that I'm in. That should be better. Tell me if it's better. If it's better, we can leave it as is. If not, I'll try and adjust it again. Everything, are we better now? Is this a little bit better on the echo? Yeah, just let me know if it is. If it isn't, I'll do my best. Okay, so let's take a look at this because I think that there's a magnificent lesson here. Okay? I want you to understand for 1 second that anytime the Torah says something, it illustrates something or discusses a point. Always, in every scenario, what the Torah is discussing is wider or larger than you might have thought at first glance. The Torah is a master at understanding the nature of human beings. So therefore, in every single instance, it descends directly into the heart of the matter and tells you an idea that when you look at it, suddenly you realize how powerful these ideas are when they relate to you and me and not just to a king. In fact, we've discussed this many times before. There's a law that says that a Jewish person, when he goes to pray the Amidah, he says, Baruch Atah Hashem, he bows in the beginning of the Amidah, and again, when does he bow? At the end of the Amidah. He bows in the beginning by Avot, he bows again by Modim. Fascinating. The halakha tells us that a Kohen Gadol, when does he bow? He bows at the end of every blessing. Interesting. You'd have thought that maybe the halakha would be the same, and it isn't. Let's carry on. Listen to this. Okay? One more idea. When does a king have to bow? What would you think? What would you say? What would you say? When does the king have to bow? So listen to this. This is amazing. The halakha is that the king stays bowed from the beginning of the Amidah until the end. Why? Because you see, in Judaism, the concept of humility is inextricably bound up with the concept of leadership. The more humble, the more of a leader you are, the more you have to have and achieve some level of humility. Because the more power you have, the more, first of all, that goes to your head. But second of all, also, you need to balance out this idea of leadership with the purpose of leadership. One more time. We need to balance the idea of leadership with the purpose of leadership. Let's look at politics together for 1 second. Every politician, the minute they get into office, there's really only one thought on every president's mind the minute they get into office in their first term. And that is, how do I stay in office for a second term? You see, even though he had the best of intentions when he first came in, the minute you taste the power that the office offers, suddenly you can't imagine living without it. And although there's lots of people who have the best of intentions when they get into office, once they get bitten by that bug, it's very difficult for them to ever retract from that bug, to move away from tasting that power. So let's look at the 4 different things that the king is not allowed to have. One of them is seemingly a side issue, and that is the one which relates to taking them back to Egypt. especially because according to many interpretations, the point of not going to Egypt was for a specific reason, okay? We'll see what that is in just a minute. I asked you before, why does it say that he has to do these mitzvot when he sits al kiseh malchuto? Says the Kli Yakar, kiseh malchuto. Kiseh stands for kesef, susim, and isha. Remember, 3 things he's not allowed to have. He's not allowed to have too many wives. He's not allowed to have too many horses. And he's not allowed to have too much money. Okay? What do you think these 3 things symbolize? Within the palace of a king, these ideas symbolize radically different things than they symbolize outside in the world. A horse might be, like, remember there's a song that used to go, a horse is a horse, of course, right? On Mr. Ed, right? What's a horse is a horse? A horse is a horse. But what did a horse mean to a king? A horse meant might. In fact, we say this every day in the Tehillim, in the prayers, in between Ashrei and, in between Ashrei and Ubal Tzion. We say, Ele barechev, ve'ele basusim, ve'anachnu b'shem Hashem Elokeinu naskir. These kings, these powers, they trusted in chariots, ve'ele basusim, and these in horses. Horses were the first invention that man brought to warfare that could tilt shift the power balance between them and their enemy. So the first thing we talk about a king not having too much of is power. The second thing is kesef, is the idea of money. What does money mean to a king? It means luxury. It means any sort of luxury that the king would chase after. But finally, Isha represents ta'ava, desire. So these 3 things, money, power, desire, they have no place. Excess of these things has no place in the palace of a Jewish king. Says the Torah now, and listen carefully. If you could sit al kiseh malchuto, if you could sit on top of these 3 things, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute, then you know what happens. Then the king writes 2 Sifrei Torah. 1 Sefer Torah for his home, and 1 Sefer Torah that he takes with him no matter where he goes, and he learns in it every single day. A king has to have 2 Sefarim. It's not enough for him to have 1 Sefer. Because the Sefer that a king takes with him when he's on his travels, and what he needs to do in various circumstances which are not the norm, that's 1 Sefer Torah. But there's another Sefer Torah, and that is the Sefer that the king takes, the king leaves in his home. And I need to share this idea with you. You know, sometimes a rabbi needs to understand the nature of a situation that he's in. I'll give you an example. I was giving a explanatory service in a synagogue in London back in the day. People had their phones out while we were doing the explanatory service on Yom Kippur. And they were not doing it because they were trying to be difficult. They were doing it because, they'd never been taught any different. They were posting on Facebook during Yom Kippur about how hungry they were, and how many hours were left of the fast. They weren't being malicious. They weren't doing it to get anybody. They weren't, rebels. They were just regular guys and regular girls. I walked in there and I realized very quickly that there was me and one other person in the room on that day that knew how to read Hebrew. So I understood that in that room, we needed to do the service in English. Anyway, I'm sitting doing the service in English, and people are really connecting to the service in a way that they never did before. We really had a good time. I explained each and every blessing. I got people into the zone. I tried to explain to them what they were praying, how they were praying, and people, they loved it. Someone said to me, I never understood what it meant to be Jewish until I sat here for an hour with you on Yom Kippur. I can't tell you, I was literally choked up with emotion with the things that people were saying on that day. In fact, I started Chazak in London because of a comment I got that night from one person who came up to me and said, my son came to me and said that if you were the rabbi of this synagogue, he would come to synagogue every Shabbat. I said, and how often does he come now? Only on Yom Kippur. I realized the power of being able to adapt Jewish wisdom, Jewish teaching, to someone and speak it in their language to them in a way that mattered to them. However, at the end of the service, someone said, Rabbi, that was so amazing. And it makes me wonder, why do we ever bother to pray in Hebrew? Why don't we always pray in English? These, my friends, are the two Sifrei Torah. One Sefer Torah that the rabbi takes on the road. You know, when you're a basketball or a football or a baseball team, you play differently when you're playing at home and when you're playing on the road. When you're in your comfort zone and when you're in a place where you have to adapt to an unknown situation. There are times when a person needs to adapt and change and do things differently because they say, Et la'asot la'Hashem, it's a time to do for God. Heferu Toratecha. Sometimes even the rabbis, they told us to do things differently or not in the way that we normally would. But if you cannot get back, and if you cannot find an anchor to the Torah which is unchanging, which is immutable, the Torah of your home, if your home starts to look like the cut corners that you're doing, in order to be able to make people feel comfortable, eventually what you are doing is leading people back to a religion that you have watered down for their sakes, no question. But you have watered it down for their sakes, and now all there is a shell of what it formerly was. So this king, he needs to have two Sifrei Torah. One that he takes out to the people, he goes to war with. And at war, there's different things that happen. I'll give you an example. The law of Eshet Yifat Tor, a woman that they find amongst the captive. We're going to read it in a few weeks' time in Parashat Ki Tetzeh LaMilchama Al Oivecha. In that parasha, we find a halacha, a mitzvah, that is there only during the time of war. There's laws for war. There's a way of living when a person is on the road. You know, a person, there's actually, if you look at Masechet Berachot, you'll find that there's a special kind of a prayer that a person prays when they're traveling, when they're at work, when they need to pray a little bit faster. But imagine that we now took that and we brought it back here. We brought it back. You know, there's a big discussion now. Some people and rabbis and synagogues are saying, you know, Rosh Hashanah, we should have much faster services. We should skip, huge parts of the prayer. You know what's going to happen if we skip huge parts of the prayer? People will come and say, Rabbi, this was amazing. We need to do this every year. I was just at a Corona wedding. It was a beautiful wedding. We want to wish a beautiful Mazal Tov to the Dabach and Lo families. And you know what? Because of Corona, it was in a small place, beautiful. We did the chuppah. It was supposed to be out on the beach. It was rainy and windy. So they brought it inside. So where did everybody sit when we did the chuppah inside? They sat in their seats for the dinner. And everybody said, this is such a great idea. Imagine, as the chuppah drags on, you're sitting in your dinner seat. Amazing. I think people would be very happy for the chuppah to take as long as it wanted, so long as they were, like they say, fed and watered. What's the problem? The problem is, if you did that in Corona, I understand. But you do that in a regular time, actually people are not focused on what's going on under the wedding canopy because they've got all the food in front of them on the table, right? So you see, what the king has to understand is that there's a Judaism, if you will, that exists, that dwells in a place of uncertainty, that lives in a place of difficulty on the road, etc., etc. But that cannot tarnish and that cannot become the Judaism we expect of ourselves when we are on our home turf. There we need to strive for an excellence that sometimes seems impossible when all the chips are down. I still remember someone came to my house and they were complaining to me how much they hated praying. And it was very difficult for them and they couldn't pray and they got so angry when they prayed. And I said to them, okay, so stop praying. Rabbi, you have to pray. I said, you do have to pray. You also have to like praying. You also have to not be angry at God when you're praying. Do you understand? So I said, 1 week, I'm telling you from now, as your rabbi, I'm forbidding you from praying. Can't pray at all. A week later, the person's calling me up. The guy's like, Rabbi, please, they're having a minyan for our beat downstairs. I just want to go down and hear the Kaddish. I said, nope, it's not a week yet. You understand? That is not an ideal situation. But sometimes a person needs to recognize where somebody is and where they are not, and how to adapt in that moment, but at the same time to have an unmovable Torah that never, ever, ever changes. That is what this king is supposed to be doing. So I want to share with you an amazing story. The Gemara tells us about King Solomon. King Solomon was a king who ruled over the Jewish people with incredible wisdom, with beautiful knowledge. He reigned over an era of unbelievable peace amongst the Jewish people. And then the Talmud tells us something unbelievable. A usurper came to the throne of King Solomon. Some say it was an angel. He came and he banished King Solomon away from his throne. He looked exactly like King Solomon. Nobody knew the difference. So King Solomon is now on the other side of the country. He has no money. He has no recognition. Nobody knows who he is. All he's got is a walking stick. And the Gemara says that Shlomo HaMelech malach al maklo. He ruled over his stick. Malach al maklo. He ruled over his stick. What does that mean? Did he tell his stick where to go, what to do? Did his stick pay taxes to him? The idea is, here Shlomo HaMelech was a powerless person. Even if he made it all the way back to the king, to the kingdom, would anyone even believe him that the person on the throne wasn't actually the king? What's the likelihood of someone who looks exactly like the king stealing the throne from you? How did that happen? And yet, with all of that going on, Shlomo HaMelech still felt like a king. What an unbelievable lesson for every one of us. When our business, our relationships, our Judaism, our connection with Hashem, our connection with ourselves, when we're not happy, when we're depressed, when we're upset, when we're anxious, when we're nervous, when we feel let down, when we're disappointed, when we're dejected, to still feel on whatever it is that I have, that I am a king. I think that's something which is so powerful. And please, let me describe how powerful this idea is. What did he rule over? Did he rule over a beautiful, burgundy royal robe? I could get that. You could be a king over your clothing when your clothing is the clothing of a king. But what is a makel? A makel is a walking stick. It meant that Shlomo HaMelech needed a stick in order to walk. Right? That's what it means. On his walking stick. How did he feel like a king over something which expressed weakness? How are you a king when you are weak? How are you strong when you aren't strong? He was a king because he felt, Maklo, this was my stick. It's mine. I remember once breaking down like a little child in a hospital room. I go to visit this guy. Unfortunately, he has a cancer and he's never going to recover from it. The doctors have told him, say goodbye to everybody. This is it. This is your story. And I came in and I was, doing my best to try and lift his spirits. And listen what this young man said to me, Alav Shalom. He said, Rabbi, he says, it might be cancer, but it's my cancer. I was like, what do you mean? What does that mean? He says, so long as I could say that something is mine, it means that I am alive. It means that I have a brain. It means that I can identify that something belongs to me, that this is my story. And if this is my story, why am I going to let every naysayer, why am I going to let the disease tell me what my story is? I'm in charge. This is my cancer. Cancer's not in charge of me. I'm in charge of it. I can't tell you, I'm just sitting there. There's tears running down my cheeks. As this kid spoke about something that was hurting him, that was weakening him, that was poisoning him. But it was his. And it was his to rule over. And yes, the stick is something that he walks with. But where's his hand? His hand is placed firmly on top of it and he controls it. What an unbelievable thing that is. Malach al maklo. I want to share with you something which I thought was very powerful in the Hebrew language. The word makel, which means a stick, looks remarkably like the word melech. Mem, same letter. Lamed, same letter. Chaf sofit is, what does it look like? It has a stick there and it goes down. It almost looks a lot like the kuf. Just what happens? In the chaf sofit, the leg of the kuf, which was over here, shifts and continues the letter down. Right? Doesn't it do that? Did you ever notice that? So this is what a chaf looks like, chaf sofit, and a kuf looks like this. Look at Rabotai, look at this. The melech, mem, lamed, chaf, he takes the stick, the walking stick, and he puts it underneath his power. Malach al maklo, al the makel. He took a stick, something tiny, and he said, I'm in charge of this. A person could lose their house, they still have their family. They could lose their family, they still have their health. They could lose their health, they still have their diseases. They have their challenges, these are mine. And I'm going to be the one that's going to dictate to them what they will be. So how does a person have this strength to be able to go out and fight with one Torah, come back and remember exactly who he is? How does he do that? And it will be, says the Pasuk, when he sits al kiseh mamnachto. I said before, what does kiseh mean from the Kli Yakar? Kiseh means kesef, susim, isha. 3 things that the king is not allowed to have. A person cannot be swayed. He cannot be swayed by his money. He cannot be swayed by his power, by his ego, by his standing amongst other men or other women. And he cannot be swayed by his desire. If a person can sit on that, we keep talking about this, being above the stick, the melech above the stick, being the person who sits on top of his desires. Where do we find this idea? The Torah says a magnificent expression. It says that when Avraham Avinu was given the biggest challenge of all, the challenge of the Akedah, he went, Vayashkem Avraham bavoker, Vayachavosh, and he saddled et chamoro, his donkey. He saddled his donkey. Interesting. What does that mean, he saddled his donkey? What does that mean? Our rabbis tell us the word chamor, which means a donkey, is the same word as the word chomer, which means physicality. Avraham took all that was physical, all the weaknesses, the limitations of a physical being, and he said, I am bigger than this. Vayachavosh et chamoro. He took his spirituality, his physicality, and he saddled it, and he sat upon it. There's a remarkably similar pasuk. Vayashkem Bil'am baboker. Bil'am also wakes up in the morning. And he gets on his donkey. Seems like Avraham Avinu. But then if you remember, he's hitting the donkey. And he hits the donkey again. He hits the donkey a 3rd time until the donkey says to him, what are you doing to me? Am I not the donkey that you always rode? Our rabbis tell us, they quote the Gemara, what does it mean that you always rode? It means it in a, unfortunately, euphemistic way. Bil'am was someone who was intimate with his donkey. He was a committer of bestiality. So while Avraham Avinu wakes up early in the morning to go on a mission of holiness, and he conquers and he saddles his physical desires, Bil'am is someone who is getting intimate with his physical desires. His interaction with his chomer was one where he couldn't rise above it. He wasn't sitting above it. What he was doing was he was intimately engaged in it. He couldn't separate himself from his physicality. It was so difficult for him to do so. And look exactly how it plays out. Bil'am knows what God wants. He says to God, can I go curse them? And God says no. But I want to go curse them. And God says no. But Balak is waving in front of him kesef, money. He's waving in front of him. He tells him, oh, it's such a shame you couldn't go. I had in mind to give you such honor and such power. Kiseh, Susim. You see? Each one of these elements in Bil'am was very powerful. The one that's missing is Isha. And I think we understand why when we see Bil'am's relationship with his donkey. That wasn't one that he needed. That wasn't what he wanted. But he was someone that was dominated by that sexual desire as well. You see? So here's Bil'am, a person who's so mixed up, so wrapped up in his needs, in his physical needs, he can't see straight. God tells him straight, no. You're going to go to curse them, I'm going to put blessings in your mouth. Why would Bil'am go? You know what the answer is? The answer is, unless a person is sitting above their desires begin to completely overtake them. I remember once a beautiful meme that I read. It said, it's an interesting thing to note that it takes exactly as much effort to win in rock, paper, scissors as it takes to lose. All you're doing is you're putting your fist, this guy's putting the hand, you're putting scissors, right? Does it take any more effort to win than to lose? No. All you have to do is be involved in the game. Life is like that. It doesn't take more effort to be good than it takes to be bad. A person just needs to be engaged in the game and be ready to be able to be the one that calls the shots. If you're not calling the shots in your life, if you're not sitting on your chamor, if you're not ruling over your stick, you know what happens? The stick rules over you. You get pounded over the head. If you're not ruling over the chamor, the chumriyut, the physicality is ruling over you. It will dictate to you. It will take your life, bring you to places you never wanted to be. And what? You're going to say afterwards, what do you want from me? This is life. This is how my life is. No, there's no such thing. Life doesn't lead you. You lead it. It only leads you if you let it. That is the power of this lesson, of the Melech. Rabotai, each and every one of us, when we place a king upon the Jewish people, we have rules for what that king needs to look like. But inside of each and every one of us is also a king. And sometimes it reads, the story of our internal kingdom reads like some sort of bloody novel where there's a constant rebellion, where Napoleon is on the throne and then off the throne and in the Isle of Elba and back on the throne and back in prison. Because ultimately, a person decides, sometimes by an active decision, sometimes by no decision. A boxer could lose a fight by no decision. You know that? A human could lose the fight of his life by no decision, by not deciding. The other day I was in a chat and I was asking a group of people a question and nobody answered. And one person said, look, I hate to be the naysayer, but I don't think this is a good idea. And you know what I responded? I responded to that person. I said, you know what the best thing about naysayers is? That they are saying something. At least you have an opinion. You're trying to pull the conversation, the idea, to one way. So the question that everybody has to ask themselves is, Som tasim alecha melech. Place upon yourself a king. Who's a king in your kingdom? Is it your anger? Is it your ego? Is it women? Is it money? Do you see? Is it power? For people that are power hungry, they'll trade everything. They'll trade Isha. They'll trade their family, their loves, the life of those that love them. They'll trade their friends for power. They'll stab their own mother or grandmother in the back. Because for them, above Isha, the idea of love and connection, what speaks to them more is sus, power. Power. Interestingly enough, there'll be another person that power doesn't mean all that much to them. They don't want to be in the private eye. They'd rather be on a private island. They don't need to be in the public eye. They're happy, living in the mansion, spending obscene amounts of money on the simplest and most extravagant pleasures. For them, power, it's not the language that they speak, not the language of their passion, of their soul. And then you have people that would give up anything for love. Their morality. They like someone, they're going to try and be with them, they're going to try and woo them, they're going to try and, even if they're married already, even if it's not appropriate, even if they're not Jewish, the rules don't matter. Because what matters most is that my desire should be satiated. That person, that becomes the king of your life. So I'm going to ask you this question, the question that I think this chapter in the Torah is asking all of us. You got to have a little power. You got to have a little money. You got to have a little bit of love. Like the Torah says, it doesn't say don't. It says lo yarbelo. Don't go to excess. When a person gets into the worlds of excess, they lose themselves in it. And suddenly they can't even hear their own needs, what they want. And now listen to the words of the Torah. Fascinating, because now you can hear really, you want to put a king upon you. Asher yivchar Hashem elokecha bo. Which king should rule you? The king inside you that God would choose. Mikerev achecha tasim alecha melech. From amongst your brothers, you should choose a king. My friends, what does it mean amongst your brothers? Achecha, the word your brother, means someone who's incredibly close to you. In the Torah's description, the word achicha, it doesn't only mean a brother. For those of you who have friends that are as close to you or sometimes closer to you than brothers, family can be complicated. Friends are not always as complicated. It's easier to be a brother to someone who's not your biological flesh and blood than it is to be a brother to someone who is. You don't have the same issues. You don't have the same family problems. You don't have the same, hierarchy. You don't have the same desires to pull ahead, ego-driven in the family. It's just a friend. Easy. The Torah also says that friends can be brothers. Where do we find it? The Pasuk says in Mishlei, it says, Bechol et ehovre, at every time, a person should love their friends. Ve'ach litzara yulad, and a brother is born of a difficult time. When you have a difficult time and someone steps in and helps you, that gives birth to a brother. So you see, ach means not just someone who is, the son of the same father, son of the same mother. It means someone that's so close to you that in the most difficult of times, they are there with you. That's an ach. Where else do we find this? By Yaakov Avinu. It says about his children, and Yaakov went and he spoke with his brothers. Asks Rashi, which brothers? He only has one brother, Esav, and he's fighting against Esav. Who are these brothers? Rashi says this refers to his sons. But because they were fighting alongside him, because they went to war together with him to protect the family, they now became called brothers. Brothers are those that fight with you. That their agenda is just your agenda. That's what a real brother is. If you want to be a brother, that's what you need to have in your mind. You want to be a sister, that's what you need to have in your mind. Not how do I gain more from this friendship, but rather what can I bring to that other person? How do I manifest that person's agenda, what they need? Now let's look again. You're going to have something inside of you. You're going to make that the king over you. Make sure, mikerev achecha. It's an agenda that fights for you. It's an agenda that doesn't fight for you now, doesn't fight for you present, doesn't fight for you short term. It fights for you forever. It would be a bad friend that would tell you, the night before you're going to war, let's go get drunk. Bad friend, right? It would be a bad friend that would tell you, you meet a girl, she's beautiful, she's stunning, but she's got no character. It would be a bad friend who would tell you, yeah, marry her, she's gorgeous. Who cares if she's going to be a terrible wife and a terrible mother? Enjoy it. Enjoy the beauty. What a terrible friend. What do you mean? Isn't that my agenda? No. That's my agenda now. In this moment, when I'm weak. And when I'm weak, what do I need? What does an ach do? An ach comes to someone in their time of need, when they're weak, and fights for their ultimate agenda, not their present weak agenda, but their eternal one. What's going to give you a family? What's going to give you a long-term relationship? Is this clear? So the question I think that we walk away with tonight is, who is the king of me? And maybe even more poignantly, who will be the king of me? What will I allow to guide me? What am I putting the crown on, giving the scepter, giving the power to? Is it my chesed? Is it my moral compass? Is it my hatmada, my willingness to learn as much Torah as possible? Is it my humility? Who gets the power in this internal fight? Who do I crown king? How do I ensure that it is not about desire? It is not about money. It is not about honor. It's about doing the right thing. I want to share with you something that happened to me very recently. Okay? This is an amazing one. Okay? I'm just trying to think of how I could change the details so it wouldn't be obvious who the person is to anybody. I don't want anyone to figure out who this person is, okay? Because it's a magnificent, a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful thing. Do you know what? Actually, I'm nervous. I take it back. I'm not going to share this because I'm too nervous that someone will figure it out and that might hurt someone, and for the sake of telling a story and a good lesson, I'm not going to expose him. I'll tell you a different story. There was a man who came to the Piazetzner Rebbe, the Eish Kodesh, powerful rabbi. He lived during the time of the Warsaw Ghetto, right before the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. Okay? Unbelievable tzaddik. His books are mind-blowing. Okay? Anyway, so his gabbai, the man who's in charge of his appointments, knocks on his door. He says, there's somebody here to see you. Who's here to see him? A young man. He's got a problem. He's got an issue. Okay, the young man comes in. He sits with the rabbi. Half hour. That's a normal slot. 45 minutes. Longer. An hour now. Now he's taking 2 slots. Hour and a half. The gabbai comes, knocks on the door. He says, listen, Rabbi, I'm sorry to intrude, but as a gabbai, this is my job. I just wanted to tell you that one of the major donors for the program, the Hasidic court that we're running here, he's outside in the lobby. He's waiting to speak to you. He says, okay, I'm not done. Anyway, he carries on speaking to this boy. Another, 25 minutes, a half hour. The guy again knocks on the door. The gabbai, he says, look, the guy has to leave. This is one of your biggest supporters, right? What do you can't maybe tell the boy to wait. He says, no, I'm not. Carries on with this boy another hour, hour and a half. By the time he finishes, the boy walks out. You can see that he's been crying for hours, but there's a huge smile on his face. And he looks like he's floating out of the rabbi. His burden, his load has been lifted. The gabbai walks in. He says, I don't understand. This is a guy who supports everything that you do, Rabbi. He supports the yeshiva. He supports the boys, the programs that we run. He supports everything. Here's a boy sitting here, he's one boy. He's one boy. But this guy, his support is equal to helping hundreds of boys. How could you prioritize this kid over this chashuv, important elder in the community who's so wealthy, who provides everything for the boys and for the programs and for the organization that you run? And the Piazetzner Rebbe says to his gabbai, he says, the whole reason why I'm raising money from him is to take care of a boy like this. And if when I'm taking care of a boy like this, I stop taking care of the boy to answer the door to that guy, then have I not mixed up the means and the end? Have I not mixed up the means and the end? The point of seeing the donor to get the money is to take care of the boy. I'm taking care of the boy. You want me to stop taking care of him so I could go get a donation, which is the whole point is only in order to... But how many people think like the rabbi? Someone very important standing outside. Oh my gosh, I don't know if we could run the organization without him. I still remember feeling goosebumps on my arm when Shlomo Yehuda Rechnitz stood up in Lakewood and he talked about a certain school that had a child that wasn't maybe up to the level in religiousness of the other kids. And the school decided to throw him out. And they came to argue with the school. What are you doing? You're ruining this boy's life. And they said, what do you want from us? Other parents came along. Parents of good boys. Parents who were donors to the yeshiva. And they said, if you don't throw this boy out, we're pulling our kids. We're pulling our funding. We were in an impossible situation. So this is what we did. That's why we threw him out. And I remember him thundering. And I remember literally the goosebumps on my arm. Sometimes we forget the point. And for the sake of the donor, whose only point in your scheme of things is really to be able to support the good work that you do. So when the donor asks you to stop doing the good work that you do, would you listen to the donor? The whole reason why you have a relationship with him about this is for that purpose. How could, you know what it's like? The Gemara says, everything that the owner of the house tells you to do, aseh, you got to do it. Chutz mitzeh, except when he tells you get out. Why? The minute he's thrown you out of the house, he's no longer acting like a Baal HaBayit. The whole point of your relationship with him and the honor you have to give him, the deference you have to pay him is because he's the Baal HaBayit. When he's throwing you out of his house, that level of elevated kavod that you have to have for him, it ceases to exist because he's just thrown you out. He hasn't acted like that. Donors are supposed to be supporters. They don't dictate policy. They support your mission, your holy mission. When the donor or the supporter is giving you the antithesis of what your mission is, listening to them means that you opened up a school not to teach kids, but you opened up a school to take donations. Lest you think I'm talking about schools, lest you think I'm talking about organizations, I'm talking about you, and I'm talking about me. There are a lot of things that exist in this world that were designed to be means, and we mistakenly have made them into ends. The Gemara teaches us that the desire that a man has to be with a woman, that desire is there in order to be able to have children. Once upon a time, the rabbis, they saw it was getting out of hand, adultery. They removed the desire, and what happened? Suddenly no one was having children. Even chickens weren't laying eggs, the Gemara says. So that desire was there for a means to an end. But when you're taking in the donor and throwing out the kid and taking money from the donor in order to take care of kids, you got your head on backwards. When you make the king the means, which was only supposed to be something that was bringing about an end. When the money that God gave you, which was supposed to support the good things and the good work that you do, to help you with your family, but you're neglecting your family for the work. You're neglecting your passions and your support and your Torah for the work. What does God say? It's not what I signed up for. Som tasim alecha melech. Figure out, what is the king of my life? Who is the king of my life? And it's not as simple as saying something good. Similar to the fact that when you are appointing a king, you don't just appoint someone good. You appoint the best person for the job. What is the best part of yourself to crown king over your decisions? Your strongest good suit is supposed to be your navigational power. Not a good thing that you do, but the good thing that you do is supposed to drive your dedication. It's supposed to drive your power, the thing that pushes you over the hump. In Abraham's life, the king of Abraham's life was his chesed. It was his chesed that led him to bring all those people back to God and to Torah. And indeed, look at how he did it. He didn't give them Torah classes, he gave them lunch. And when they finished lunch, then he said, why don't you do Birkat HaMazon? So his kiruv, his Torah emanated from his chesed. That was his strongest suit. That was his king. Yitzhak's, I'm sure he was very kind, but that wasn't his king. It wasn't his melech. Rabotai, I want to share with you one last piece, which I think is beautiful. The philosophers in Judaism point out something unbelievable. This idea of being a melech, that the Jews are called the sons of a king, Bnei Melachim. When we talk about being royalty, what does that mean? It means that an animal has mem, lamed, and chaf, and a human has mem, lamed, and chaf. But they are not the same. Mem, lamed, and chaf stands for moach, brain, lev, heart, kilayot, kidneys. The kidneys is the physical process. The body taking care of what it needs to take care of. The heart is the seat of emotion and passion. And the head is the place of the intellect, where you think, where you plan, where you dream. In a human being stands tall because his mem, his moach, his lev, and his klayot are in order. It reads melech. His intellect rules over his heart. It knows that not everything the heart wants can it have. And the head and the heart rule over the desires of the flesh, of the kilayot, of the food, of whatever other physical things that the person desires. Interestingly enough, the hamor, every animal, it walks not on 2 feet, with its head up above, heart below, kilayot below, but rather it's bent over. In the posture of an animal, the mem and the lamed and the chaf are all linear. They are of equal importance. The heart is the same as the brain, which is the same as the passions, as the desires. So when a human being is crouching over, when he's bent, when he's living like an animal, like a chamor, then his head has no more sway than whatever it is that his body desires at that given moment. Neither his heart nor his head are in charge. It's just complete disarray. Okay? The opposite, therefore, is the human being when he's acting like the king over humanity, where he is as he stands. Mem, lamed, chaf. Let me end with this. When you get it wrong, mem, lamed, chaf, when you have it wrong, that spells the word chaf, lamed, mem. You have it backwards? Kalem means destroy them. Humanity is destroyed when it follows only its heart, when it gives equal footing to its brain and whatever desires it happened to cook up that day. That destroys human beings. And every one of us knows someone who was destroyed by his desire for alcohol, for drugs, for pleasures of the flesh, for the thrill of gambling, and for the many other thrills that a person can have in his life. For the kiseh, for the kesef, for the susim, for the isha, for whatever it is that occupies his mind. That destroys a human being. What is the second level? Is lemech, when the lev comes before the moach. So it's not kalem, it's not backwards, it's just got the heart above the head. Who's lemech in the Torah? Lemech is a person who was blind. He's going out shooting, right, in the forest and is being guided by his grandson. And he's telling him where to shoot. And that's how he would shoot the arrows and kill his food and eat. And what happens? In the end, he shoots not a person, but he shoots his own family, kills his own family. And then he's so upset, he claps his hands together and he kills somebody else. Rabotai, hear this. When a person lets their heart get in front of their head, although they are not kalem, they're not completely destroyed, they almost always will destroy things without even noticing. An animal destroys and notices but doesn't mind. Eats the food, poops on the food, eats the poop. Lev, oh, you think you're much, no, I'm following my heart, my passions. No, God didn't create you this way. You're only a melech when your thoughts, sum tasim alecha melech, place upon yourself this king. You decide it, figure it out. And when you've done that, then you will be guided in the most beautiful way. Never to be swayed by a donor flashing his cash. Never to be swayed by some sort of pleasure with being with someone that you know is wrong but you think is beautiful. And that is not just a matter of physical looks. Beauty can also be the fact that they have the right last name. You want to be involved in you want to marry the right family in the community. And meanwhile, the person's not good for you. Yeah, in each one of these instances, you're relinquishing the reins to something other than your best interests. May Hashem bless us always to choose wisely. Be'ezat Hashem, we should be zocheh to experience many, many, many years of great leadership from without, from those role models in the community, but even more so, unbelievable leadership from the leaders that we appoint within. See you all soon. Shabbat Shalom.